that not too long ago I had the opportunity to speak with someone who personally knows the female central to my story. And hello, it's November 2022, and I want to briefly talk about something that I mentioned in a recent video, one of my most recent videos. And that has to do with a question that someone had kind of asked with regards to who the commoner is up against. And I stated in that video that the people who are imposing, for example, injustice, even tyranny, or anything like that, are the same people who start and end world wars. The very same, for example, world wars, or any wars, that the common person fights in. And I want to kind of expand on this by contrasting this with some history. Now, I'm not going to get into the question of history and its validity, but just based on what we're told history is, what has happened. Now, when you look back to the time of royalty, now I've contrasted even up to 10 years ago how we do live in a two-tier system. Historically, we've had nobility, and then we had the commoner. And it hasn't changed. Today's nobility is, for example, the elitist types, and then we have the tier below them, who would be today's professional. And when you look back throughout history, when you look at kings and queens and royalty who committed atrocities against the common person, and there's plenty of videos talking about these types of people. And when you look at, for example, the individual known as Vlad the Impaler, and how he was doing these atrocities even with the support of much of the public, the commoner. And when you look into that, his history, I mean, it's disgusting. And his character is actually based, or is the foundation to the Dracula character. And that's a whole different tangent. However, it does kind of tie into other examples where you had, for example, these queens who would bathe in virgin girls' blood, and they would use the common person, and they would go out into the villages and kidnap them, and they would disappear. Now, you can't think that the common person during all these times, in all these examples, didn't mumble amongst themselves, even maybe protest or whatever, but they lived in fear, which is the same thing today. No one did anything. But where we see when the nobility of those times intervened was when these sociopaths, psychopaths, who were doing these atrocities to the common person, took it a step further and started, for example, going after the children of nobility to bathe in their blood. Then the nobility stepped up and did something, but until then, nothing. Now you have to ask yourself, why is this? Because the nobility is not only above the commoner, which is most people today, the majority, but there's an ownership. And I've talked about this actually in the video, how the birth certificate is ownership. Now, I'm not saying anything bad about anybody, any group, professionals, governments, or anything like that. I'm just simply highlighting some facts. When we look at this ownership, this is why no one really cares, and this is why there's so much, for example, injustice. And we look at, for example, even my story of injustice, how it began doesn't matter. But it does kind of matter, because it began with the sexual abuse, sex trafficking of these vulnerable women at an organization. And I'm just going to briefly stop here and segue for a moment that not too long ago I had the opportunity to speak with someone who personally knows the female central to my story. And a lot of the things that during our discussion that I was saying they had no knowledge of, but other things start to make more sense to them. And I guess what really frustrates me the most is the female that's central to my story, asking for my help, ended up, in a sense, throwing me under the bus by not supporting me when that whole, the start of it changed into police brutality, and then that morphed into police, judicial, and political corruption in the city of Calgary and everything else. Somebody asked for my help, I stepped up, and then when I needed help, they weren't around. Anyway, I digress. Going back to this, the nobility of today, the professionals and the commoner, which is the citizen. Nothing's done about the injustice being imposed on today's citizen. Only time that something is done is when others, these people who are imposing injustice, etc., end up doing it to their own. Then we start to see something happening. Now, yes, the nobility of today will more or less give their opinion on a legal matter, whether it be criminal or civil, and it's just an opinion that these people have. The only difference between their opinion and yours, mine, is they need other people to enforce, other people like mine, to enforce their opinion. At the end of the day, it's just opinions being thrown around. But, you know, there are times where you have the smoking gun, whatever, and, you know, they make these decisions. But when it's these people who are imposing the injustice, they won't do anything unless the injustice is being done to them, either by the commoner or by their own. I just want to give you some things to think about. Again, I'm not stating or implying anything negative about nobility or people in various positions of authority or anything like that. But it's not just my story where, you know, there's a plethora of examples. I've highlighted, for example, Daniel Holtzclaw, Stephen Avery, Christine Wall, her story, and her story is still ongoing. All these people's story are ongoing. I've even mentioned the gentleman, his last name is Vase or Voss, his story, but his story is more or less ended. He's living in the aftermath of injustice, even though he was exonerated. There's a plethora, countless of these stories. Just like in history, when we had insane kings and queens, I'm not saying that that's not even possible today, imposing injustice on the commoner, the peasants. Just things to think about. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share.
Listen to this and write it down if you can't remember it. You're never going to outgrow warfare. You simply must learn to fight. I hear people saying to me, oh, when is it going to get easier? When you die.